Are you guys all familiar with Montgomery Bell State Park in Tennessee?
She's recording.
All right, we got a recording
I
going
know
on.
about it. I don't live far from there.
Okay, so I'm sure you've heard about Werewolf Springs.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you about the legend of Werewolf Springs. Back in the late 1800s, there was a farmer, and he was headed home. I think he was headed from Burns to somewhere over by Nashville, and he was going by way of wagon, and he had his servant with him. And considering the time frame, the servant was probably a former slave, but nobody has ever confirmed that for me. I just know that the man was in the wagon, and it was getting late at night, and they were headed east. And as they were going along, they began to notice that there was something in the woods around them that sounded like it was following them. Well, being late at night, they thought they were being, tracked by bandits, and they began to get worried. Well, they're in a wagon being pulled by a horse, so of course they speed the horse up a little bit. But whatever's walking in the woods beside them starts running a little bit, and it's keeping up with them. So they go a little bit faster, and the faster they go, the more this thing keeps up with them, and they realize that whatever it is that's following them can't be human because it's moving as fast as this horse is, and there's no way a human being could be running through the woods that fast. They get so panicked and so scared that the farmer suddenly jumps off the wagon this way, and the servant jumps off the wagon that way, and the farmer rolls in under the bushes. But whatever was following them went with the servant, and the farmer laid there and listened while the servant was torn to pieces by a creature he could not identify. It was growling and screaming, and the servant was begging, God, help me, I can't take this, help me, please. But it tore him to pieces, and he begged for mercy. He wanted desperately to get away from this thing, but he couldn't, and it was ripping at him. And the farmer could hear the bones crunching, and he could hear the cries of his servant. There was nothing he could do, nothing he could do to save the guy until finally, with a horrible crunching sound, the servant breathed his last. The farmer, he sat there, and he laid there under the bushes until dawn. He was too afraid to move. He was afraid if he got out and tried to run, whatever this thing that had killed the servant was going to come after him. So he laid there, and finally the sun came up, and he got up the nerve, and he ran as fast as he could back to town. And he told everybody, something's killed my servant. I don't know what it was, but it tore him to pieces, and I heard it, and I can't find anything, and I don't know what to do. So all the townspeople come out. They search the whole area. They can't find hide nor hair of the servant. Nothing. No shreds of clothes, nothing. It's just gone. Well, time passes, and more people start reporting hearing things in the woods until finally a group of the townspeople, and I believe it's people around Burns, but it may have been Dixon or something, one of those towns in that area, they decided they were going to get together and they were going to form a posse. Now, if you're familiar with Montgomery Bell State Park, at the southern tip of it, it used to be a farm called the Hall Farm, and there's a spring there, and it's just it's not much bigger than that bonfire. It's just a little hole in the ground, and they decide there's a clearing by the spring, and they're going to gather there because that's pretty close to where the farmer had his incident. And they all decide they bring a goat out there, and they stake a goat there in the clearing, and they all get in the woods around the clearing, and they got their guns, and they douse their lanterns, and they sit there and they wait. Now it's a kind of a cloudy night, and the clouds drift across the moon, and things go kind of dark. And then, of course, they drift out, and it gets a little brighter, and they can see the goat. And then the clouds come across the moon, and it gets dark. And then the clouds drift away, and they can see the goat, and the goat's starting to pull at the stake. And then the clouds come across the moon, and it gets dark, and they can hear the goat. And then when it clears up again, they can see the goat, and the goat's definitely panicking, and it's pulling, and it's trying to get away. And suddenly this giant, hairy, two-legged beast of a thing, jumps into the clearing and grabs the goat. And all of the farmers, all of the townspeople stand up, and they start shooting at this thing. Every one of them, they emptied all of their rifles into this thing. In the meantime, clouds cover the moon again. Everything goes dark. Somebody gets a lantern lit, and they hold it up, and the thing is gone. The goat is gone. 3 of the men in the posse are gone, and they're never seen again. Well, word got out about this. People didn't know, what is this? People are talking about it. They're talking about it in New York and in California. There's some kind of a monster, and people are describing this thing like it's a werewolf. This big game hunter hears about it. He decides, well, there's nothing I can't kill. I've been to Africa and I've shot elephants and I've shot lions, tigers in India. I can do any of this. This is nothing for me. So he comes there, and there's a cabin there on the Hall Farm, not far from the clearing, or from the spring. And it's got a clear view of that clearing, and he rents the cabin for a week. Now, for the first several days, he goes out and he tracks during the day, and he doesn't really see anything. But, he sits there on the front and looking out the front window at night. He doesn't see anything go by, but he keeps looking. He keeps thinking something's going to show up. And lo and behold, after about 4 or 5 days, he's sitting there one evening looking out the window, and this tall, walking on 2 legs, hairy creature walks into the clearing. The big game hunter, he's like, well, this is obviously it. This is something I've never seen before. It's got to be it. Pulls up his rifle, takes aim, fires. Dead shot. Now, you'd think it would have dropped it because this guy's shooting with a big old, elephant rifle. But it didn't. All it did was serve to make this thing angry. And it comes charging at the cabin. And the big game hunter, he's trapped in the cabin, so all he can do is climb up into the rafters. And he gets as high up in the rafters as he can, and this thing tears down the door, and it comes inside. And for the whole night, this guy's trapped up in the rafters, and this thing's circling under him, and it's reaching up, and it's trying to grab him, and it's growling, and it's hissing at him. And it's the most horrible-looking thing he's ever seen in his life, and he's terrified. Every now and then, he gets just the right angle, and he fires, but it doesn't affect this thing. Whatever this thing is, he can't kill it. And he's terrified, and he gets down to this last 2 bullets, and he knows he's going to shoot one more time, and if he can't kill it, the last bullet is for himself. So he takes aim, and he's getting ready to make that final shot at the beast, and about that time, the sun pops up over the horizon. The beast looks out the window, looks up at him, and it turns and runs out the door. And it's never seen again. Big game hunter. He immediately climbs down out of the rafters, packs up his stuff, and he leaves. He says, I found something I can't kill, and this is it. Well, of course, this is the story of the werewolf of Werewolf Springs. Interestingly, there was a little girl before Montgomery Bell became a park that lived in the Hall farmstead. She had been sent out to the spring to get a bucket of water, and she never came back. After a couple hours, all they found was the bucket by the spring. If you're familiar with the park, there are 3 lakes there. It's a really nice park. We're not talking, it's not wood like this, it's not rugged terrain at all. It's really well manicured, it's beautiful, they've got a golf course, they've got 3 nice lakes with a swimming beach, and there's a really nice convention center there. It's not anything like what you would expect something like that to be, but to this day, people report while walking in the southern part of that particular park, hearing growling and feeling like they've been being tracked by something, and they don't know what it is. On the westernmost side of the southernmost lake, there's a ridge with caves. And back before it was a park, sometimes the farmers would take dead animals, dead livestock up there in the caves where it could die and rot, or not die, but be dead and rot without having to smell the rotting carcass. And so when they went exploring up there, they found bones of large animals, as you would expect. But what they couldn't explain were the human skeletal remains inside those caves. And that, my friends, is the story of the werewolf of Werewolf Springs.